Now, I can't tell you what's going on with the slide. That's just gonna happen. So we're good now. All right, whatever. God, I'm telling you, I'm just gonna tell you right up front. This is one of those mornings where I'm like, God, you are in control and not me, because literally I have no control of what's going on. Like nothing's happening with it. So we're good. I think we got a great team back there. We're rolling now. But there you go. Technology, your friend told, doesn't work, right? Like everybody have that problem. Like it's great to only do what I want to. Um, we've been dealing with an issue. We started last week. We're going through it for 3 weeks because I figured ending August is a good time to talk about this idea of comparison, right? I think that it's one of those things that we're really honest. We all struggle through in our culture today, comparing ourselves to other people, to whatever everyone else has, and it can be a real problem. It can be like falling into a trap, right? We kind of look over our shoulders, left, right, we scroll up and down, trying to keep up with what everyone else is doing, and allowing it to affect how we feel about ourselves when that happens. Remember last week, I talked about how our culture suffers from OCD, obsessive comparison disorder, right? That is something that we all wrestle with, right? We want to know what everyone else is doing. We want to know how my friends spend their weekend. We want to know how my neighbor's kids are doing in school. We want to know how my brother or sister or my cousins are, what they're doing, and how it stacks up with what I'm doing. Right? So we have this need to see what everyone else is doing, and it impacts us. For honest, it has an effect on who we are. But we got to remember something, is that social media, listen, this was around before social media, by the way. Social media just added kerosene to that fire, right? Because it's much quicker. And so when we look at other people's lives, especially on social media, if you're on Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever you guys are doing, you're seeing people do stuff. Here's the deal. You're seeing the highlight reel of those people's lives. Remember, we talked about that? Like, people aren't posting the real life situations on those pages. They're posting what they want you to see about their pages. Their beautiful vacation, their amazing family, like all of these things. What you don't see is all the time and frustration it took to get that one photo, right? All the wrangling of your kids and going, would you just smile already? Like, all of those things we have to do to get that one photo. In fact, I love this. Someone coined this phrase. It's hashtag InstaSham, not Instagram. Right? Because what we're looking at is not real most of the time. It is a made-up version. It is a highlight reel of someone's life. No one ever posts, oh man, my acne is really flaring up today. Selfie. Like nobody posts that stuff, right? Because you don't really put that on there. You put the best of what you want people to see. In fact, we talked about how we live, Andy Stanley has this phrase talking about living in the land of Ur. Right? Because all of us, when it comes to comparison, we want to be rich, we want to be cool, we want to be good looking, we want to be, but we want to be just a little bit more than everybody else in those categories, right? We don't want to be rich, we want to be richer. We don't just want to be skinny, we want to be skinnier. We want to be smarter, prettier, hipper, talented-er. Like, it's just we want to know what you are at, and we just want to add a little more to that in our life, right? Like, you're really nice, I'm nicer. Right? Or like your house is big, mine's bigger, right? Your car is cool, mine's cooler. We add the ers, we do. We just kind of all, and that's where we get stuck in this comparison thing where we have a lot of and we're adding it to everything, right? And here's the thing, when you do that, when you measure your life that way, you always come up a little bit short, don't you? It's a little bit short, because there's always, I promise you this is true, there's always someone with more than you. There's always going to be someone. And so then what we do is we look down and we go, well, I might not have as much as they do, but I have more than them. So at least I feel superior to them, even though I'm not up here with them. And we get stuck in this trap, don't we? And it's sick, and it's twisted, and it's unhealthy. But can we at least just admit that it's real? Because you can't deal with anything until you at least admit that it's there, right? You can't deal with something until you're willing to admit, I have a problem with this. And I think we could all raise our hands and say, I have a problem with this. Okay? Now, here's the thing. When we don't measure up to somebody else, when we look in the mirror and what we see in the mirror we are not happy with, we start to look around to figure out who we are and what we do. And like we said last week, when we choose this, no one wins. No one wins when we choose comparison. Right? It is a lose-lose situation. Okay? It is a finish line that you will never cross. Okay, like Solomon told us in Ecclesiastes last week, the passage we looked at, it's like chasing the wind. You can't catch the wind. You can try to catch it, you never will. And that's how this happens to us when we get caught in this trap of comparison. It's like chasing the wind. We will never get there. In fact, it's really a sin because when we get stuck looking at other people for our measurement of what is supposed to be our life, we're really taking our eyes off of Jesus and putting on everybody else around us. And we break relationship with people, don't we? Because we put a lot of pressure on other people to be something, to look a certain way, to do something most of the time because it makes us look better. If you're a parent, I know I'm guilty of this. We can be so guilty of putting pressure on our kids to be something we think they should be, not because it's what's best for them, but it's what's best for us. If you're a husband or a wife, how much do we add to we want from our spouse? Right? How much do we put on them to say, you know, the house is clean, it could be cleaner. Or you make a lot of money, you can make more money, richer. Right? We do that to each other, and sometimes we just say, hey, I'm just doing it for your own good. Nah, that's lying. We're not doing it for your own good to reach your full potential. Most of the time, we're doing it because it makes us feel better. And do you see how evil that is? How messed up that is, that we do that to each other? And we talked about last week some questions where we get stuck there. And I asked some make you mad questions at the end of my message last week to make you think about stuff. And one of the questions I asked you that I want to go further into today when we talk about this trap of comparison is this one. Who is my reference point to tell me I'm okay? Because now if you think about that question, or if you were here last Sunday and you thought about that question, you probably have an answer to it. Most of us could probably tell right off the bat. Who are we looking at to check to see if we're okay? Who's our mirror? All right, is it our friends? Is it our family? Is it our siblings? You know, is it our parents? Is it our bank account? Is it our boss? Is it the business? Is it your looks? Right? Is it how well your kids are doing? Is it how well your husband or wife is doing? What is the vantage point? What is the thing that you go, okay, when I hit this tells me I'm okay. This tells me if I'm making it or not. Because when we start looking around to others to define our lives, and we start seeing what they post on social media, and we start measuring ourselves against them, it creates this anxiety in us, this inadequacy. And it actually has a medical term. Did you know that? It actually has a medical term. It's a term you may have heard of before. Maybe some of you haven't. It's called this, FOMO. Now, some of you are like, what is FOMO? Is that contagious? Like, do I have to get shots for that? No, FOMO is simply this. It stands for fear of missing out. Now, you may have heard this before. You may have been like, oh, that's an old word. Nobody uses that word anymore. But here's the thing. It's so prevalent in our society that they actually have a definition for it in the Oxford Dictionary. So this is the definition in the Oxford Dictionary. Anxiety that an exciting or interesting event may currently be happening elsewhere, often aroused by posts seen on social media. So that is how much FOMO has taken over society. The Oxford Dictionary gave it a definition, and it's actually considered a medical issue nowadays. People can suffer and be diagnosed with FOMO. How crazy is that? I mean, if you're in school, I wouldn't try to, getting a note out of class because of FOMO. I don't think your teacher would allow that. But, I mean, think about it. According to this definition, 10 out of 10 people suffer from FOMO. That's like 100% of us, right? That's everybody. We all deal with an issue like this of saying, you know what, I don't know, I feel like there's just, even when you aren't looking at social media, have you ever just feel like there's that pressure that I feel like maybe something's happening that I don't know about? I don't want to get on social media because I don't want to know what everyone did that I wasn't a part of. I mean, I remember in college, I'll admit, I suffered from FOMO big time. And in fact, there were several nights where I didn't start my homework until midnight or 1 a.m., and my wife will tell you this is true, because I wanted to make sure all my roommates were asleep first so I wasn't missing out on anything. So then I would do my work. Like, that's pretty bad. I don't know if you guys have ever done that before. Maybe you guys are way better than I am at this stuff. But I'm just being honest. Like, I was always like, I don't want to miss out. I don't want to miss out. I don't want to miss out. It's a real thing that we struggle with in this life. And there's that mentality almost, and maybe you've heard it put a different way. The grass is always greener where? On the other side of the fence, right? The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And now, if you live in a neighborhood like I live in, that may literally be true. I'm sometimes envious of my neighbors' yards. But like that idea that the grass is always greener someplace, it's always a little better someplace else. A little bit, if I just had a little more then my life would be better. If I had a little more, like we have that mentality. But let me tell you a truth that we're going to look at in Scripture in just a minute. The grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence. You know where the grass is greener? Where you water it. The grass is greener where you water it, feed it, and weed it. That's where the grass is greener. It's not always greener over there, right? And that's what we have to remember to put into practice, to slow down,
To get off the comparison treadmill and stop saying, well, if I just had that, or if I just had that, or if I just scrolled up and down and had that, or what they got to do, then I would be happy. Then I would finally feel like something and go, oh, let me just stop for a minute, slow down, get off this comparison treadmill, and stop looking left and right to figure out who we are. Stop giving into FOMO and developing the patterns of up and always do more to keep up. But instead of doing that, we have to stop and ask ourselves the important question of who am I actually looking to tell me I'm okay? And I really think that the answer is this. We need to take our cue from the God who made you. That's our mirror. The cue we have on who we are, the cue we have on how we're doing and what we're up to should not be from the people we see on social media, from our neighbors, our cousins, our friends. It should be from God. And we need to take our cue about who we are from the God who made us, saved us, and is with us. And so today, I want to get super practical with you, if that's okay. I know this is like one of those messages that you're like, well, I think we need to talk real terms, what we have to do to get over this. So I want to give you guys some FOMO-busting truths, if that's okay. To say, listen, if we apply just these simple things to our lives, we can beat this thing. We can get out of this trap of the constant comparison that we find ourselves in. And I want to do that by looking at a passage that many of you probably know. You may have heard it other places, you may have read it yourself, but Psalm 23. It's one of my favorite Psalms, and it's one that you've probably heard before, but in this Psalm, I believe there are a couple of key FOMO-busting truths that we can build our lives on. So I want to read it, and then we'll talk about that. Psalm 23, and you guys can read it with me. I made a real one verse per slide. I want to read this out loud, because sometimes we need to hear this ourselves, right? So read it with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. That is a psalm we have probably heard, but I think very often there's truth in there we just miss because we just read it too quickly, or we think it's only to be read at funerals, or we think, I don't really know where the psalm fits in my life. There's a lot of truth in there. Now, I heard some of you when you were saying you memorize different versions of this. I get it, right? Like quiet waters could be still waters. Loving kindness could be mercy. Like there's different translations. This is the NASB. But the point is there, right? There's truth in this verse that has to do with FOMO. And so the first one I want to look at is this. The FOMO-busting truth we have to understand is that God's path for you is personal and it's significant. So here's the thing. This is what I love about this psalm. This psalm is personal. This is something that, if you knew anything about the Hebrew culture in the Old Testament, it was very communal. People spent time together. It was all about the family. But this psalm stands out in the sense that this is very personal, the psalmist as they're writing it, right? The Lord is with me. He leads me. He makes me lie down, Lord, in green pastures. He leads me by quiet waters. I shall not want. Like all the verbs in there are I or me. There are personal verbs that he's talking about here. It's a personal tone throughout the whole thing. And that should make sense to us because when we follow God, it's a personal choice. It's a personal God we are following. When you come to know Jesus as your great shepherd, like these verses talked about, you come into a relationship with him. It's not somebody else's relationship with him. It's not your kid's relationship. It's not your pastor's relationship. It's not your it's your relationship with God. It's a very personal, one-on-one, heart-to-heart relationship where you are his child. He adopts you into his family. He fathers you. He personally looks after your life in a very individual way. And sometimes we forget the personal nature of a relationship with Jesus. We want to make it like just something out there, and we think, well, maybe God cares about them, but not about me. No, we got to stop and realize this is a personal God that we follow. Jesus is a personal, not a private thing. Let me just say this. This is not just something we keep to ourselves. This is something that's very public, but it's very personal. God has a specific, and he wants to work in your life in a personal way because he created you. He knows you. And when you feel like you're missing out on significance, when FOMO is kicking in, you feel like you might be missing out on purpose because other people are doing things you don't get to do, you need to stop and remember that your purpose comes from God, and it is personalized by him for you. The path you are to walk, the race you are to run is yours. It's not anybody else's. He's a personal God. But here's the other thing we have to remember. It's significant. Many of us feel small in the scheme of things. Many of us feel like, well, I'm not this amazing, great, evangelist. I don't run a mega church of 10,000 people. I don't have this. I don't have that. You feel very small in the scheme of things sometimes. I know I've felt that way before. And, honestly, comparison will do that to you. It will make you feel small. It'll make you feel less than you are. But here's the thing. We have a God who makes our path significant for us. And it tells us that in this verse, in verse 3, he restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness, paths of right living, the right paths, you could say. And then here's the kicker. For whose name's sake? For his name's sake. This is not for Mike's name's sake, okay? This is not for Rick's name's sake. This is not for Rachel's name's sake. This is for his name's sake. And his name is great. God exists. We exist to amplify, glorify God's name and make his name great. Right? That is the chief end of what we are here and doing and worshiping and living, is to glorify his name. So therefore, if he is creating a path for us to walk on, it's going to be important. Because through us and how we live our life, he is glorified. So nothing you have lived through, nothing you are doing is insignificant in the kingdom. It's not. He uses our stories to tell of his glory. Doesn't he? He uses your story. He uses our lives. He uses our brokenness and our healing. He uses our experiences of pain and recovery. He uses our experiences of sin and repentance and forgiveness and washing and cleansing. And he uses all of those things to bring glory to himself for his name's sake, because his name is great. And so the path we're walking is not insignificant, as much as you might feel that way, as much as the comparison trap we fall into wants to make you feel that way. It's not. You matter. Your life matters. What you're going through, even if it's not fun, God can use it. It is all part of the story he's written for you. It's specific, it's personal, and it's significant. I know sometimes this question of God's will can be a big question that we ask, right? And many of us boil down to wanting to know exactly what he wants us to do in every situation. Who should I marry? Right? Is there that one soulmate out there that God created because they're the only person on this planet who could tolerate me? Right? Do we have that mentality to stuff? And sometimes we believe that, right? And a lot of it has to do less with scripture and a lot more of romantic comedies that we watch. Okay? That's not really a scriptural attitude to have. Because here's the thing, just picture it, just go there with me. If we think God's will is so specific, there's only one person created for you to marry, what happens if you don't get that right? And that was somebody else's person to marry. Well, then whose life did you just mess up? And when they don't do that, then whose life did they just mess up? We'd all be with the wrong people if that was the way God worked. But here's the thing. God's will is a whole lot less about the actions you take and more about the person you're becoming and the path you are on. It's less about what we're doing and but who we are. So does God have an opinion about where you should go to school? Maybe. Ask him. Does he have an opinion about who you should marry? Probably. Ask him. He will tell you. But we can't get so caught up in the fact that it's just one thing for God's will. If I get it wrong, my whole life is messed up. Because here's the thing. If you don't hear God say specifically, go to this college, well, could you go to college A and college B and still grow in intimacy with Jesus and become looking more like him? Absolutely. Does your relationship with that person be the only thing that can help you grow into Christ? Or can you grow and follow Jesus no matter who? Like, there's bigger picture to what God is doing here. And sometimes we get caught in this path. If I don't get this path right, my whole life is messed up. God's will is more about who are you becoming in the path that he has created for you. And so much of FOMO and comparison is trying to figure out, am I doing it right? Am I living a meaningful life like everyone else seems to have? And if I don't get this one decision right, then I won't have that life. God is saying, whoa, let's slow down a little bit with the comparison thing here and say, listen, I'm bigger than that. And I do have a plan for your life. And if we don't slow down enough to take our cue from him, to let him be our mirror, we're going to start trying to run somebody else's race. We're going to start looking at somebody else's life and say, that's who I should be. That's how my life should look. And that is a recipe for sucking the joy right out of everything you do, right out of every relationship that you have, to try to be somebody else and try to live somebody else's path, walk their path. Mark Twain is known for saying a lot of things, but I love a quote that he has. It says, "Comparison is the death of joy." I think he's right on with that. Because when we stand before Jesus one day, and make no mistake, Scripture is very clear, we will all stand before Jesus one day. Regardless of how you feel about him or not at this point, we will all stand before him one day, and he's going to ask you a question, and it's not going to be, he's going to say, "Hey, Mike, how'd you do at running Francis Chan's race? How'd you do at running Andy Stanley's race? How'd you do at running Jim's race? How'd you do at running Rick's race?" No, he's going to say, "How'd you do at running your race?" He's not going to say, "How'd you do at running anybody else's race?" Because his path for you is personal, and it's significant. And so here's a key thought with this idea. Don't measure your life with someone else's yardstick. Don't measure your life with someone else's yardstick. Don't compare your path to somebody else's path. Focus on the path that God has for you. And so here's the thing. We're not the only ones who struggle with this. Even the disciples messed this up. That makes me feel a little better of myself when I see the guys who actually walked with Jesus, who lived with him, still get this stuff wrong sometimes, right? I'm like, all right, okay. I'm okay if I don't understand this all the time, right? Because in John chapter 20, they're having a conversation. And I love this guy. It's very short, but it speaks to this idea that they even wrestled with this whole idea of comparison and FOMO. And so in John chapter 20, there's this conversation Peter's having with Jesus. It says, Peter turned around and saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during supper and asked, "Lord, who will betray you?" Peter asked Jesus, "What about him, Lord?" Now here's what you got to understand. This is the end of the book of John. This is after Jesus has been crucified, risen from the dead again. The disciples were out fishing. He goes to the beach. He calls them in. He just cooked them an amazing fish breakfast, right? And they were eating together. And he had this amazing, empowering, restorative conversation with Peter about how he's going to feed his sheep. Jesus, that conversation, maybe you remember, where Jesus is like, "Peter, do you love me?" He's like, "Yes, well, feed my sheep." And tells him 3 times. And then when this conversation happens? Right after that. Right after Jesus is like, "Peter, I have a plan for you, and it's specific, and it's awesome." And Peter goes, "All right, Lord, I love you." And then he goes, looks over his shoulder, he's like, "Oh, that's John. That's the disciple that Jesus loved, huh?" It's like, all right, so what about him? I love Jesus' answer, because he goes, Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? As for you, follow me." He's basically saying, Peter, it's none of your business about John's race. It's none of your business about John's path. I'm talking about you. Because Peter is doing what we all do. He's like, "All right, God, I get it. Jesus, you love me, but what about him?" I want to know. Peter is essentially asking Jesus, is my path going to look as good as John's? Because we all know you love him, right? He's teacher's pet kind of mentality Peter probably had. Oh, everybody loves John. And Jesus, the disciple that Jesus loved, right? Which, by the way, that was John's term for himself, because this is the Gospel of John, so we don't think John might be a little full of himself sometimes. But so John is saying that about himself. And Peter's like, I get it. You want me to feed your sheep, but I want to know what his path is going to be. And Jesus is like, dude, seriously? Seriously, we're having this conversation right now? What does it matter what his path is going to be? We're talking about you. Your only requirement is to follow me. Your only requirement is to look to me, keep me as your mirror. That's your job, right? In fact, Charles Swindoll says this about that quote. He says, Peter must have thought, "Who am I compared to Mr. Faithfulness?" John, right? But Jesus clarified the issue. John was responsible for John. Peter was responsible for Peter. And each had only one command to heed: follow me. We are responsible for our journey, guys. We cannot measure our success based on somebody else's yardstick. We cannot measure our life based on somebody else's path. And even the disciples struggled with this. And Jesus is like, guys, you have one thing to focus on, me. One thing, follow me. That's what matters. It's an amazing, amazing thing. When we see that and we go, wow, okay. Maybe the whole comparison trap I've fallen into is because I've forgotten that. Maybe I've tried to be somebody else's path. And God's like, I've got that for you. Your path is significant because your path is to make my name great, to glorify my name, and in a way that nobody else is going to be able to do it. Because for you, your path is with me. It's personal. Follow me. Don't worry about your friends. Don't worry about everyone. Worry about you and me. Follow me. Second FOMO-busting truth I want to pull out of here real quick as we close is that God sets the path, but also God sets the pace. So here's the thing. Pace is a big deal when it comes to walking and running our races, isn't it? If you've ever been a runner, you know that pace is a big deal and how you pace yourself. Because if you don't pace yourself correctly, you'll use up all your energy before the end of the race. And see, a lot of times we pace ourselves according to somebody else's race, right? We pace ourselves according to our neighbors. We pace ourselves according to our family. And we look at, well, they're getting ahead. Well, they were able to get the promotion faster than I was. Their kids got on the travel team before my kids got on the travel team. You know, they were able to book that summer vacation that I could never afford. You know, whatever it is, we look at everybody else's pace and how they're running their life, and we go, well, I could better catch up. I better run faster and faster and faster. We're Sonic the Hedgehog when it comes to life, right? Like, we just got to get there and keep up with everybody else, so we kick it into high gear. But here's what happens. Jesus is saying, let's slow that down for a second, and let me lead you beside quiet waters for a chance, huh? He says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters, or still waters, depending on the version you've memorized. You know what those words actually mean? Like literal translations? It literally means waters of rest. Jesus is saying, when you're running with me, when you're following the path and the thing that I have for you, it's going to look different. Your pace is not going to be determined by anybody else but me. Let me show you the waters of rest that you really need to run by. Like, let me adjust your pace to where you should be. Because when you're trying to match everybody else's pace, you exhaust yourself, don't you? We exhaust ourselves trying to be somebody else. We exhaust ourselves trying to keep up with everybody else. And we think that's just how it's supposed to be. We think it's how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to go faster, faster, faster. Keep going harder, harder, harder. It's like it's normal to need 3 energy drinks to get through the day. Or 3, grande, sweet cream, cold brew, nitro coffees from Starbucks, which, by the way, has a lot more caffeine than regular. I learned the other day. They don't even do ventis because it'll kill you. There's so much caffeine in those. But we need those things to get through the day, and we think that's just a normal way to live. And that's how it should be. In fact, what cracks me up is we actually use our busyness as part of our comparison issues with other people. We almost make it a game. Well, how busy are you? Well, I'm busier, right? Like, you're taking your kids to how many games? Yeah, I did twice that, right? You know, we make it a badge of honor, and we almost make it they're not as busy as I am, so obviously I'm doing something right. And they're not quite, working hard enough. I'm not as busy as them, so I need to add some things in my schedule, because what's the most common answer we have when someone asks you how you're doing? Busy. Really? How you feeling? Tired. Well, there's a reason for that, because you're busy all the time. But it becomes this just natural pace of life. We feel like it feels like being in the rapids all the time. Remember in whitewater rafting? Anybody ever done that? Right? Like, I've done it once or twice too. It's kind of like this. Like the lower rapids in the Colorado River. We feel like we live there all the time. We're constantly in the rapids of life. Now, I don't know if you've ever been whitewater rafting. The one time I went, I thought it was going to be like this. Okay, so I'm all psyching myself out. I went on the Delaware River, and it was not like this, okay, at all. So I'm sitting there, and I got to be honest, I'm sitting there in the raft, and I'm on the side, and our guide's taking us out, and we're paddling. He's making us learn on the maneuvers, and it was flat, still water. And I was, like, in my head getting angry. I'm like, this is boring. Like, we're just paddling. If I want to float down this, I'd get in an inner tube and soak. I don't want to be in a whitewater raft doing nothing, right? So I was actually angry about the still water at that point. And the only rapid we hit the entire time was, and we went around this bend. Now, I have to be honest, it was a rapid that did freak me out a little bit, though, because it had just rained a ton. And our guide, the whole time he's telling us, like, listen, this is just preparation. It won't always be like this. But I'm not listening to him. I'm like, I paid this much to sit in this stupid raft. We're just floating. Like, I'm just in my head, like angry about the still water that we're on. And we come around this bend, and the rapid was like this huge drop-off that developed because it had rained so hard, and there was rocks, and it was pretty intense looking. It was kind of a little scary, got to be honest with you. And so he's like, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through that rapid, but when we get right to you have to hit hard on the left side, like I told you, so we spin the raft around and go through backwards, because it's the only way to hit it without falling out of the raft. And I'm like, I'm going to die, and this is what I paid for. And so we make it through the rapid, and then we get back, and I was never happier to see the still water again. I was like, thank you, Jesus. Like, here's the water, like the quietness of it, right? Sometimes we forget how amazing those quiet waters are. Sometimes we forget how amazing those still waters are because we get so used to living at someone else's pace in the rapids of trying to keep up that Jesus is like, can you just slow your roll for a sec? Can you just walk with me and keep your pace at my pace for you, not for anybody else? So we have to remember is this truth. Don't compare what you know about yourself to what you don't know about others. Because when we do that, we set ourselves up to be at someone else's pace, living someone else's race. And that's not what God has for us. See, FOMO sets us up to do that. FOMO sets us up to know all of our weaknesses, all of our failures, all the things that aren't working on our life, and we compare them against all the things we don't know about somebody else's life. The fact is they may look great on Pinterest, Instagram, whatever you're looking at. It may look good, but you don't know what's really going on. They may have gotten the promotion ahead of you, but you have no idea what they sacrificed to get there. They may look like they had the perfect family, but you don't know about the fighting that goes on behind closed doors. You don't know about the fear the parents have of what's going to happen to their kids when they're not around. You don't know about somebody else. And when you compare yourself and all the things you know about you to all the things you have no idea about anybody else, you set yourself up for a constant disappointment. So Jesus is saying, stop doing that to yourself. Stop trying to figure out everybody else. Just look at me. Just look at me. Run my race for you, at my pace for you, and I promise the comparison, the FOMO, it'll stop killing you the way it's killing you. We won't feel the need to pick up the pace to be everybody else. We can look at our lives and go, God, what have you given me? It's significant. It's important. Right? Because this Psalm 23 that we're reading, it's less about trying to be something we're not and more about who are we following. Right? This is all about following the Good Shepherd. It's not about the actions we take. It's about who we're following through this. Who's our mirror? Who's our path? Who are we following? And the Good Shepherd, Jesus is reminding us, it's about him and us. And the path we have is significant, and the pace he set for us is right for us. So as we apply these FOMO-busting truths to our lives, let's remember that we need to take our cue about who we are from the God who made you, the God who saved you, the God who is with us in this process. And if you have to compare something, do this. Compare who you are now to who you were before Christ, right? Look at your life and look how far God has brought you. Look at who and what he's brought you through. Look at how he has provided for you. Compare to the changes that he's made in your life. Compare to the peace. Compare to whatever you have seen in your life. Look at what God has done and enjoy and celebrate that. Not what he's done for somebody else. Not somebody else's race and what they have that you don't. Look at what he's done in your life and how far you have come and how he has been with you every step of the way. And yeah, we all have a long way to go still. I'm telling you, nobody arrives until we meet with Jesus, right? But we're all on that journey, and God has worked in so many different ways. Let's celebrate those things. That's some good comparison to make. To say, God, before you, I was this way, but now, man, you have worked so faithfully in my life. You have worked so faithfully in my kids' lives. You've worked so faithfully in my husband and in my wife and in my family. And just even the little things that I just never really celebrated before because I was always too busy comparing to somebody else's. Somebody else's. I was measuring my life with somebody else's yardstick. Right? I was comparing all that I am not to everything we don't know about everybody else. I was doing all those things and I missed what you have done for me. Let's go back to that and say, God, I gotta get off this comparison treadmill and go, thank you for how much you've worked in my life. And to take our cue from the God who made us, not from looking left or looking right or scrolling up or scrolling down, but keeping our eyes solely and squarely focused on Jesus and his path for us and his pace for us. And if we do that, I believe we can be people who can beat this trap. I believe we can be those people who are not living the race that everyone else is running, but we can follow Jesus the way he created us to follow him. By still waters, trusting him to lead us as a good shepherd, that we have everything we need, that he is with us no matter what, even when it feels like the valley of the shadow of death. Like we can trust that he is with us and he is good. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up and close us out today. And I just want to challenge us with that. Imagine what your life would look like from this moment going forward as you go throughout your life if it wasn't in the comparison, FOMO kind of approach to how we get through our days. Imagine if it was just the peace of knowing, yeah, God's plan for me is for me. It's my race. But it matters. And it's significant. Imagine if we said, hey, listen, I'm going to take his cue for the pace that I should be running this life at. Not everybody else's, but what does he have for me? What would your life look like? How would your days be different? What would you do differently with your time? if that was how we lived. Because honestly, your answer to those questions really probably point to how we should be living and how Jesus wants us to live anyway. To get out of the rapids, to realize that there's waters of rest he's got for us. Now, I will tell you this, there will be rapids in life. That's a given. We're going to go through those times, but we don't have to live there because there are waters of peace that he wants to lead us in as well. So God, I thank you for today. I thank you for this chance to be together. Lord, I thank you that you're a God who leads us, who is always with us. You are a personal God, as the psalm points out. Lord, you do have a race for us. You do have a path for us that you want us to follow. You want us to conform to to be more and more like you, to work in our lives in such powerful ways. And you are, and you will be working in us, God. So as we look at our lives, I pray you'd help us to see the truth. See who you've made us. See how you've worked with us, been with us through everything, and will continue to be with us through everything. And how you've brought us along, how you've been with us through the rapids, how you've been with us by the still waters, God. Lord, help us to get off the treadmill of comparison. Help us to run the race you have for us at the pace you have for us and nobody else's, God. May we live out of that identity, that connection to you. And may we set the example for others and show them how they can get out of this trap too. Because you are the God who brings freedom and peace. Lord, we thank you for that. In your name I pray. Amen.